few clouds coming through. So it's a good time to be in Columbus. Couple things before we get started. If you're having trouble on the Zoom hearing, please put in the chat that you're having that difficulty, and be sure that you have your computer sound system turned all the way up and your microphone off. Okay, so our lecture today is from Bhagwan Satiani. He has told me to shorten this to next to nothing, so I won't give you a bunch of information about him. You can go to the website, to the Emeritus Academy website, and go to his online profile, and all the information is there. But let me say that he came to OSU to complete his vascular surgery fellowship at Ohio State and OSU East. He has a number of interests, including clinical research with over 200 peer-reviewed publications, 6 books, several book chapters. He has been coordinating and teaching leadership development and business education for physicians, conduct of practice management, and surgical residents and faculty. His recent interests include faculty retention, physician leadership in workforce shortage, the burnout issues. His book from, I'm just looking for, I thought I had the date I did, An American Journey, Life Lessons for Parents of Immigrant Children, garnered significant attention from immigrant groups. His other published books include the Smarter Physician series, that's 3 volumes, co-author of The Coming Shortage of Surgeons, Why They Are Disappearing and What We Can Do About It, that's from 2009. And from 2013, Color Atlas and Symposium of Vascular Diseases. He has community interests here in town, which includes volunteering and serving on the board of ASHA Ray of Hope here in Columbus, which is organized to prevent domestic violence in South Asian households. He has also served as Commissioner and Secretary of the Minority Health Commission of the state of Ohio, and he plays percussion for an Indian musical group, Jankia. Is that right? He'll say it correctly once he gets up here. Anyway, I would like to welcome him for his lecture today, A Journey of Acculturation. Yeah. I get nervous, I'm sorry. Frustration and determination and gratefulness in the U.S. Please welcome Professor Satiani.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Academy for the grant I received 2 years ago. The grant has come in really handy. The grant has come in really handy. It has paid for too loud? That's better. Okay. It has paid for computer statistical support. The money is paid for statistical support. You can hear me, right? So the research is about leadership and the outcomes after we taught leadership to physician and researcher faculty for a year. So we needed controls. So the money came in handy for the control group to use red caps to survey them. So we're going through the data right now to see what the outcomes might be. So, and where'd the slides go? So just a brief background. I was raised in Catholic schools, pretty much. Learned to say the Lord's Prayer. Um, the nuns were pretty much from Malta, so this is who was teaching us, pretty much. And then following this, I went 500 miles away from home at age 10. My father wanted to send me to the best schools he knew of. So again, it was Catholic school. I have good memories, but the one bad memory was Father Trinidad. I forgot my homework one day. So I didn't know, first time I forgot, so I was called to Father Trinidad's office. I walked in, this little person, Father Trinidad up here, and he said, "Where do you want it, son?" And I'm thinking, where do I want what? So then he looked at me, pointed to my hands on my behind. Unfortunately, I picked my hands. I was numb for several days, Father Trinidad. But it was exercise in discipline. I think that's what I got at boarding school. Then I moved closer to home because of health issues, and then ended up in the schools. Colonel Coombs was the British colonel in charge of this school. During that time, I was really sick, had to have major surgery. And I saw the surgeon who was like an angel. And I decided, age 12, that's why I wanted to be. So that's what led to the journey. Then I went to medical school and came shortly afterwards. If you notice, the professor, the chief, doesn't have any socks. So this fashion was pretty hot back then. It's making a comeback right now. But basically, look at this. Never had a job, no bank account, never dealt with anything. Lived with my parents, which is pretty much back then what everybody did. Had an arranged marriage. My wife of 52 years is right up front. So it was good growing up, but it's clear that I'll get into it. I certainly didn't want to stay there. But America to me back then, I pretty much shared what was going on here in terms of the cultural aspect. So 63, I remember JFK's assassination. 69, I was in medical school. I remember Armstrong. I mean, that was a big deal throughout the world. Mostly, my education was from the comic books, TV shows, The Fugitive and Perry Mason, a lot of movies, a lot of music was British or American. Favorite music to this day is CCR, Creedence Clearwater. So it had a big impact in terms of, problem was it was limited in what I was exposed to. I mean, this is all I knew. Didn't know the population much. I'd seen movies, didn't pay attention to who was living and what was going on in the United States. So the object was to get out of there. I'll get into that in a little bit. The war was going on back then, 1971, the war going on. And there's no way you could get out of the country without the Army giving you a no objection certificate. You couldn't even leave the airport. So they called me for the interview for the Army. I mean, knowing in, I knew they wouldn't take me. I was the wrong religion. I knew they wouldn't take me. So they gave me a certificate, which I was happy to take. And pretty much early 1972, had to take some exams, a test of English as a foreign language, took that, and the medical exam. Pan Am was still working back then, so 1972, I landed in New York, January 26th. My first encounter with an American was the immigration officer. So I came back, given the passport. He looks at it. Oh yeah. I said, where's your employment? So took out my contract and gave it to him. He read it, looked up and said, but this says January 1. This is January 26th. How do you know you have a job? You know, I don't know what happened. I said, well, I wrote to Dr. Glenn and I'm okay to come. So he, half-truth. I had written, but I hadn't received a reply. So he stared at me for a little bit. I guess something made me trustworthy. He said, okay, go. So there I was. The first experience I had with a regular person was at the airport. I landed at Hartsfield International Airport. Oh, before that, my father had given me one name of a person he barely knew to call from the airport. So I walk in there and I see a payphone. I think, okay, I've never seen one before. Okay, that's a payphone. So I picked up, talked to the operator, dialed the number, and she says, that'll be however many cents or whatever it was. So I put that in, and then she says, sir, you need to put in this much cents. And I say, I did. She said, I don't show it. Then she said, how many quarters did you put in? And I looked at the phone. I was so embarrassed. I hung up and hoped nobody saw me. I had a dollar bill stuck in there. Had no idea, you know, I didn't know. Didn't have any quarters, didn't know. So it was kind of, landed at the airport, hung around the airport, and didn't know what a taxi or bus, how you got to the hospital apartment building. So the security guard sees this person standing by with the suitcase, comes over and says, where do you want to go? I said, I'm headed to Crawford Lawn Hospital. So he says, you don't know how to get there? I said, no. He said, why don't you wait? I get off my shift. I waited till midnight at 1 o'clock, drops me off in his yellow Volkswagen, gives me an address, as my first lesson in the US, how to write a thank you note. Never written one before. So somebody at the hospital said, this is a big deal, somebody giving you a lip. So I wrote my thank you note. Crawford Lawn Hospital is well known for the first anesthetic administered. It was a private hospital, hadn't taken in the university system yet. So things started to happen that really tested my patience and whether I was in the wrong place. So the ex-chair of the Department of Surgery at Emory had come to our hospital, and they were firing everybody else back then in the 4 months I was there, and said, go find a new job in 4 months, July 1. All residencies start July 1, so I didn't have a job. And this ex-chair fought for me with this new chairman and said, you got to take this person. I just got lucky because in the conferences, I happened to just by luck know some anatomy questions and nobody else knew them. So he figured somebody knew something out of that group. So he went and fought for me, but otherwise I was out. The other issue was the physicians know there was a pyramid system, which means you started with this many people and only 14 wanted to go into general surgery, which is where I was headed. So residency surgery was 5 years. So at third, fourth, and fifth year, they cut you from 14 to 8. You had to go find other jobs. So I just got there, this big hospital, in July. In September, they obviously didn't need me. So I'm saying, okay, I'll get a chance. A month later, somebody out of the 8 they had picked dropped out. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm next in line. I worked really hard. I think they know this, that. Not there. Now I'm really telling my wife, I said, you know, I don't know. I need to go back home or something. They aren't going to pick me. And it's not, we were poor. My family's well off. We had a big bungalow, cars, whatever. So it wasn't the money or the income. I was there to run. So in January, a third person dropped out. But you want to call it luck or destiny or My phone calls upstairs, I'm not sure. But yeah, third person drive, went into the armed forces, and so I got my chance after 3 people dropped out. Can you move it forward? So that's the interesting. So the second year resident, which is a fairly junior resident, I was in charge of the surgical emergency room. Now remember, Grady Hospital, downtown Atlanta, if you drive by 75, you see it. It's one of the number 1 or 2 trauma centers in the country still today. The Knife and Gun Club was very active. I saw stuff that I'd never seen before. So one day I was there and I happened to walk in the medical emergency room next door for something, and I just turned around and looked in the water fountain. And it was rubbed off on the wall, but I could see it. It was like a major shock to my system. I just didn't comprehend till I had the chance to sit down and think about it, because in the movies and comics and things, it's nothing like that. And by that time, I'd figured out, we were in downtown Atlanta, I'd figured out people acting, reacting. By then, I'd figuring out what was going on. So, but that was the start. Some of the things I learned, patient care, not the patients themselves. I'll talk about that a little later. We were making rounds one day, you know, when doctors come around with their trainees, and they were all standing by the bedside. And back then, I was the new intern following them. So the patient had a gallbladder removed, and they were suspecting pneumonia. Second, third day, they got a, you know, lung collapse or whatever. And so the resident said, get an x-ray, get this lab, get this. And I'm looking at them. Where I come from, it takes an act of God to get a chest x-ray. And lab, forget it. So later I asked the intern, I said, why aren't you going to listen to his chest and examine? He said, no, this is the way they do it here. And so there was hardly any touching. I mean, it's, you know, procedures were very different. The one good thing that I saw happening was if you had complications, deaths or complications, it was openly discussed. People were questioning each other, why this happened, why you didn't do this, why. So that was something new. Whereas back home, nobody asked any questions, they were too afraid. The communication, the language was, I couldn't understand anything. We came down the elevator, asked the maid, you know, go to downtown, and all we could understand was the direction. Couldn't understand a single word. I mean, it just took a while to understand non-British English. Learned a good words though. 10-4, I never knew what that meant. Okay. A tad of this, suck was still a word there. Gross, cold, my man, groovy, all these words I'd never heard of. They weren't in comic books. If they were in the movies, I certainly didn't hear them. The other thing I was struck by was the vastness. The country was just huge. The parks, the mountains, but mostly things, food, supermarkets, mortgages. I've never seen anything like this. We got lost in supermarket. What is that? Driving on the wrong side. Yeah, it happened a few times. We got cursed out driving on the wrong side. Stadiums, but the waste, this much piled on your plate, half of it was thrown out. It was just like, you know, most of us, the older generation, you know, your parents kind of made you come to your senses if you threw anything away. Color, you know, our population was homogenous, pretty much all brown, some darker, some this, that, and the other. I probably saw a couple of people on the street that were white or black, and you just never see them. So that was very different. The thing that struck me about Americans, and it still does today, is the generosity. Right from day one, all the way through, the people I met and have come across is just the generosity. I never heard of anonymous gifts. People most of the country, they want people to know you gave this because they want your name up there. I never heard of anonymous gifts before. Formality was pretty strong here. For us, if you wanted to go to somebody's house, we just go knock on the door. We never call or say anything, like, I want to come over and see you. No, you had to make an appointment and get somebody to, The issue of privacy was big. What we saw here, coming here. The two things besides the cohabitation was going on, and certainly never saw anybody hold hands in public. Forget the other stuff. Never saw anything. I mean, it's like, what's going on here? But the thing that struck me was learning from failure. I never heard of somebody's kid going to school or college and say, okay, you don't like this, or no, or go ahead and shift and go do something else. If you went there, you have to go finish it. There was not the freedom or the choice to go into another career. It was a different life here. The value of life was huge here. I mean, I don't know if it's the upbringing or the country or the place where you come from, where the value just wasn't there back then. Wasn't. And here, if somebody died, for unknown reasons or something, I mean, people would investigate, people would be looking. The country would fight for somebody who was in prison somewhere else outside, even a single person. So that was pretty strong, in my opinion. People were different in their behaviors. Over there, most people were pretty direct in terms of here. I think there were nuances here. I mean, somebody disliked somebody, most people would be quiet, wouldn't say anything. So the trend here was, just, walk away or do this or do that. Over there, people are pretty open, whether you like it or not. It just came right across. So you learn how to deal with people, what to say, what not to say. It took a while to figure out what was offensive, what was not. That was a transition. People didn't like to be told certain things, or people didn't want to hear you say some things, but you figured it out after you saw a few looks here and there, figured it out. So one evening we were in an apartment and somebody said, anybody heard of the Fox Theater downtown Atlanta, Peachtree? It's a very famous theater, apparently. So they said, why don't you, your wife go see this great theater? It was lovely. It's a walking distance from you. So we go there and the lights go out, we watch the movie, and we lasted 15 minutes, 20 minutes, something like that. I mean, the movie was about the violence and rape and this and that. I mean, just never seen anything like this. It's just walk back home and say, we can't take this. So the next thing that happens, my wife is away. And so this resident, 2 years ahead of me, John Sattler, he's a plastic surgeon now someplace in Arizona. So he talks to me at work and he says, how about if I take you to dinner and go see a movie? I'm thinking, John's a senior guy, but if he wants to take me, okay, let's go. So we go to the movie hall, and I think it was in Buckhead, part of Atlanta. So we go there, and it's kind of a rundown kind of theater. I didn't know any other, except for the Fox Theater, didn't know any. He said, okay. So he gets the tickets, we go inside, and there's like 6 people sitting there. I mean, it's like, it doesn't smell good. It's like, what, I think you know what's coming. I didn't know. I just went there. So then this movie starts. Oh, and he had told me, he says, you're going to get 2 movies for the price of 1. It's a double movie. I've never heard of a double movie. So this thing starts, and I'm looking at him, and he's just laughing away. People told me later, you fool, you should have asked him where you were going. So we went home. He just had a good laugh, told everybody about it. Patient encounters, this was one of the words I learned that day. So I was on night call, and I got called to do what's called a cut down. So what that is, if you can't find veins to put your IVs in, those days, now you have other techniques. You made a small cut down, little incision near your elbow, wherever you think the vein is, and go feed the catheter into this. So the nurse says, hey, would you come down? Mrs. Sparks is really just crying, and nurses have started all kinds of IVs, and there's nothing. You can't find anything. They've been stuck, I don't know how many times. I said, okay. So I looked, needed a cut down. So I did it. And then after I finished stitching her up, she looks at me, this older lady, she says, honey, give me sugar. And I'm looking at her, I said, there's no tea or coffee here. What is this? So she's looking at the nurse is looking at me, nurse is smiling. I said, what? Where's the sugar? She wants a kiss. So, sugar, didn't know anything. She became family friends. We went each other's house, so that's Helene Sparks, that's my wife there in front. So some of these words came, like the 10-4 came because of a motorcycle injured person. He lost his foot or something. And we were taking care of him, and he walks out, he says, 10-4. And I'm like, look around, what's 10-4? I guess it means okay. So some of the words came with communication with patients. The generosity was just striking. And this nurse was a senior nurse there, Sybil. The moment I walked in the hospital, the second or third day, she was all over. She wanted to do this. She wanted to instruct me how to behave, how to do this, how to do that. Took us under her wing. Our daughter was born, and she was right there, called Granny, till we moved out of Atlanta. I mean, I hadn't encountered that at all. It left a big, big, huge impression on us. And I'm sure other immigrants will tell you stories about individuals and people who just said or done things for people that are just out of this world, that they've never experienced before. The problem, as I see looking backwards, is not the people strictly. It's the professional problems I had. I thought it'd be the other way around, coming to a different country. It wasn't that. So, as I said, the pyramid, so I made it out of the 8 people at 3rd, 4th, and 5th years. So at the 5th year, you have 8 residents and 4 rotations. So you stayed 3 months at each place, then you rotated. University hospital, so only 4 residents could go there, right? 3 months, you know. And so my name came out in the beginning in September, October, that next July I'd be going to University Hospital, which was a coveted location, more complicated procedures and referrals. People came from all over Georgia, and it's a big deal to learn there. I was really happy. I said, oh, this is great. I must be doing a good job. So a month before, I get called by the surgery chief, not the chairman, Dick Emerson. And he says, look, there's been a change. I said, what change? He said, you're not going to University Hospital. You're going to the VA. I said, I just came from there, did 6 months there. He says, no, you're not going. I said, well, what's this about? He said, the chair just changed, and he's asking this other dude to go there. I said, well, so I went and opened my mouth, I talked to a few residents, somebody, and said, you know, this is not fair. And it's obvious why. I mean, they didn't want somebody like me at the university hospital. It's pretty obvious. So no way I'm going there. So one day, so the chair must have heard about it. So one day at this conference, grand rounds we call it, we finish, I'm walking away, he calls me over, and I thought, oh my God, I don't know what's coming here. So he looks at me and he says, you know, I'm the chair of the American Board of Surgery and the American Surgical, I mean, these are the top surgical organizations. I've heard you're bad-mouthing our program. I said, you know, I just talking about why the change, that if you ever open your mouth again, you're not gonna do any surgical, anything here. That was it. So I shut up. So the next thing that happened, at the time I decided I wanted to do vascular surgery. It seemed more challenging and more variability in procedures. I liked the patients I was dealing with. I liked the elderly, dealing with them. So the vascular fellowship back then was 1 year after your general surgery. So Emory had a program, so I applied there. And every year that internal candidate like me had applied, they had taken that person. And there weren't many programs. I interviewed 3 places and nobody wanted me. So I said, okay, I'll get in here because they always take an internal. And no, they took this other person. Less said, the better. So I said, okay. So I started applying someplace else. And here's where the sun came out for me. I mean, it just, besides the personal relationships I had with people, the professional part started to really change. The first sign of this was my father came over US, he had bad coronary disease, triple vessel disease. Coronary bypasses back then were just starting. Our hospital had the top cardiac surgeon from the university come over and do it. So my father had it done. So I got a bill from the university for the surgeon services. So I called, they gave me a very small discount. I said, you know, I don't have much money, I'll just pay. So I paid him over 3 years. I think it was $20 a month or $10. The hospital bill was close to 10 or 11,000, even back then. I mean, it was about it. I'm thinking, there's no way I'm gonna have to. So I walk into Dr. Glenn's office, an old southerly gentleman. I think he owned the hospital or part of it that later became part of Emory. So I walk in, got the hospital bill in my hand, and I handed it to Dr. Glenn. And I said, Dr. Glenn, look, you know, I'll pay it. I'm gonna get my job, a fellowship down the road. However month you instruct the financial people, I'll pay it a month. He looked at the bill, looked at me, he just tore it up. Said, you're one of our own. Tore it up, just like that. And that's Dr. Glenn, passed away in '85. He's a retired surgeon back then. So as I look back, you look and see, to make it through the pyramid system, they apparently said I was the first person of color. There was no black resident then till I was my 4th year. They had picked somebody, Dennis, they had picked it before. There was another person who didn't make the pyramid who ended up at OSU. So interesting thing was, when I didn't get a vascular job, the person in charge of the trauma critical care program at Grady, which is huge reputation, the person in charge somehow took a liking. And he said, look, I was gonna open this trauma fellowship a year from now, but if you don't have a job, how about if I open it this year? He named it after his father-in-law, J.D. Martin Fellow. He's still there, the fellowship. I didn't have a choice. Except 2 days before I started, July 1, I got a call from the place that turned me down here in Cincinnati, by the way. They said, our fellow didn't show. We have 2 days, can you come here? Of course, I didn't go. So I stayed there for a year, learned became an attending because this professor was traveling 6 months of the year. So in retrospect, it was the best experience I could have had. For a surgeon to be unafraid of anything during that year of training, the massive injuries, no fear. That's what you want in your training, to basically say, whatever needs to be done, I'll be doing. So that afforded me the opportunity. Interesting, this trauma professor of mine, when I started this in July 1, I said, hey, Dr. Stone, will you allow me to do a month with the vascular program, the chief that turned me down? He said, what for? I said, no, I want that rotation. Well, it's unusual, but yeah, I'll let you do it. I said, I want to show him. I said, okay. So I worked there for a month against this other person who's, luckily for me, turned out to be a total slouch. So the month goes by. As I'm leaving, this chief of there calls me over, looks at me straight in the eye and says, sorry, I made a mistake. So it takes courage to say that. And after I'd been in practice here 6, 7 years, I got a call from there saying they offered me a faculty position. I said, no, I'm not going. So I came to Ohio State. That's how I ended up here. So you wonder how I got my fellowship the following year. I didn't know. I thought I was the best candidate. Turns out that wasn't true. So Bill Evans, Carl, where's Carl? Oh, you know him. So he was the fellowship director at OSU. So I started July 1, and sometime in September or something, Bill cut his finger while doing a case. I was with him. So during the conversation, I said, I finally said, well, why did you give me a job? Nobody else. He said, oh, you don't know the story? I said, I don't know. The best candidate. Nope. He said, one day I got a call from your chairman at surgery who wouldn't let me rotate through the university hospital. By then, he had cancer of the zygoma. He was probably, didn't have more than a year or two. Very famous person in surgery. He said, I got a call from him. I said, well, what about? He said he told me to take you. He said, if you don't like him, I'll pay him the entire year's salary back. I didn't do anything different. I don't know what happened, but that's what happened. Of course, I came here and, went through the hierarchy of the medical thing. I think if you look at immigrants, there's a push and pull with us. We want to keep our culture. We want to keep our customs, certainly faith. And there's a difference between acculturation and assimilation. Acculturation is where your immigrants are coming and they're giving some of their customs and things back to the dominant majority here. And then the majority, you're learning something. It's an exchange, maybe not an even exchange, but it's an exchange. Assimilation is where the immigrant comes and totally is one side, and the customs and whatever is not necessarily gone, but so I consider this an acculturation. Certainly the immigrant committee from all different countries have given something back in terms of culture, sometimes not great, but mostly things that people here, simplest thing is food or clothing. That's the visible thing. If you look at what people ask, well, why did you come here? In my case, it was pretty easy. It's freedom and safety. We weren't starving, so that wasn't the case. But right beyond the list was education. I could have stayed there and learned whatever little there was to offer. But the biggest thing was coming here because I simply wasn't going to stay or raise a family here. So let me give you, can't say much about patients because not in one instance have I heard anything negative from a patient face to face or a family because of who I was. Never, ever. There were disagreements from a Jehovah's Witness once, another person who wanted me to operate on their mother, and I said, no, you don't need it, things like that, but no, definitely there could have been people who saw the name or whatever and didn't show up for office or surgery or whatever. I mean, that's a different thing. I wouldn't know about it. But I think what I did was, first day when I started my own practice, I kept a thank you file. Kept every card, every letter in that folder. And when you have a bad day, some people, not doctors necessarily, sometimes, they turn to alcohol or whatever, didn't drink, so it wasn't an option. So I used to pull out a couple of notes every now and then, just random, and say, okay, I think I'm doing the right thing. So I'm going to read you one of the notes I found later in my file. And I won't read the whole thing. Some of the things are personal between the patient's family and me, but I'll let you read this. And it still tells me why I went into medicine. And physicians who are here will understand that. So this is an immigrant family. I mean, the daughter was living here, but the father had come. So she says, over the years, you have saved my dad's life many times. Don't know if we have ever really thanked you. I'll let you know how much you have done for our whole family. Not only have you saved a man's life and leg, but you gave 5 daughters and so far 12 grandchildren, more time to love and know wonderful Pop or Opa. And she ends with, he went back to Holland, must have operated on probably 4 or 5 times. It's aneurysms here, everywhere, rupture, this, that, it's just, but he made it through. And I remember this note because my father was having his second heart surgery. I had to take time off to take care of him. So I must have told her I have to leave, somebody else afterwards will take care of him. I mean, if you read these notes, I encourage young physicians to actually do this and keep reminding yourself, why are you actually here? Why you're doing this? And what makes it worthwhile? All the negativity, all the stuff that you see, or even for an immigrant. I mean, you'll hear all kinds of things. But I think your mind should go back to your purpose. Why are you here? What you're doing? And if you look at immigrants, everybody knows their contributions. So I'm not going to name names. But look at Fortune 500 companies, how people climb up the ladder pretty quickly. They just know how to work hard. They know they have to. And of course, the richer, your first generation. And, it's the leading destination. And when you ask yourself, why did they come here? Right? So my favorite memory, people ask, well, what do you remember most? I remember waiting in line for 7 years to get my citizenship. November 1979. I remember taking that oath. That was a big deal. My appreciation for the Constitution and certainly the First Amendment. I've always said the Americans are the most generous people on earth. I mean, turns out the poorest actually percentage-wise give the most. I don't know if you knew that. They do. Most immigrants come for opportunities for themselves, but mostly their families and their kids. So this is my extended family. We are missing 4 nieces and a couple of other people. So my brother, my sister, my son and his wife, daughter, and their 5, my sister's kids. So this is what we're here for. And I've always said, we immigrants are here to help America shine more, and I really mean it. I think we contribute a lot. So that's my contact. Anybody wants to shoot stuff at me. If you have any questions. Yeah.
Oh, goodness, thank you so very much. Questions? Yes.
So since we have the privilege of your wife being here today as well, um, I've had some married Indian doctor friends over the years with an arranged marriage, and they taught me a lot about that. And you didn't talk about it very much, but tell us culturally why arranged marriages work.
They don't all work.
Do they work as often as
Well, part of
love marriages, if you will?
yes. Part of the negative side of it is, people have to stay together even if they can't. The social pressure is much. But at the positive side, at least my opinion, other people can say, it's the adjustment. It's the pressure on you to understand and adjust with each other, because they don't expect you to ever get divorced. I mean, that's your baseline. That's what you start with. You pretty much have to adjust with each other. I think and love has nothing to do with it, truthfully. And we haven't met. I never saw her. She never saw me. So love has nothing to do with it. That comes.
And yet I was told that you eventually fall in love.
It happens, yeah. It's the only person you live with, only person you've known. Yeah. It's odd here. Yeah, I understand. But I'm saying it doesn't always work. Yeah. And it depends on who picks the match for you. If your parents are sensible, they know you, my maternal grandmother in this case, they kind of know, how you are, how the other person is.
Social media will affect or is affecting acculturation and assimilation, maybe
Here or elsewhere?
in the U.S. new immigrants. Will it slow that process down, or will it? How will it influence it? Possibly.
I think part of the difference in immigrants, as I see it, is before it was based on who the United States let in. Mostly it was educated class, merit, or family. It's changed now. It's not necessarily all educated. So it has to do with who the ordinary public interacts with, what the impression they get. I think it's still very positive. Social media, I don't see that having much impact. I mean, there's the bad and good were always there. It's always going to be there. Some people don't like anybody different, Other people say it's fine as long as you're contributing. And I think we are. So.
Thank you. I appreciated that very much. And I have to say, I'm a humanist and sometimes at a loss at medical talks, but in fact, the field I work on is autobiography studies. So for me, this was very much a professional talk in my field. And I want to ask two questions. They're not related. One is sort of more an archive question. You saved the thank yous of your patients throughout your life. I wondered if you saved other documents and sort of how those have helped you shape your life. The other question is, at one point you mentioned, was it luck or was it destiny? And looking back now, I wonder how you see the pattern or the journey of your life.
The first question is, I'm wondering how you knew I was writing my autobiography. Yeah, I went back and found my diaries from 1963. And so I collected photographs of my family, my calendars, everything I have. So I'm sorting through, pretty much written probably 80, 90 pages, but I got to put the context in there and I can't make it too long. So I'm working on my own understanding of the journey. So how it actually should, but the second question, everybody has a different, some people don't, I do. I'm a faith person. That's what I believe in, yeah. I think that's why it happened.
I have to point out, your latest thank you is up there in the chat.
Oh. Oh, who's this? Lorraine. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They're like family. I've known these technologists for 25, 30 years. They worked in the ultrasound lab for me at Grant and at OSU. They're like my daughters. Yeah. The other difference I might say is, and I'm not saying, it's not a generalization. Every human being is different. But I think back then, at least, immigrant physicians, and I'm not knocking other people, okay, please. But the empathy factor was really strong, at least my home, my teaching, my parents. The empathy factor was really strong. And I think if that translates to you being a physician or whatever else you're doing, it has a big impact. I mean, if I dealt with the elderly patients and they're not comfortable with color or name or where I'm from, this and that, in 2 minutes, that's gone. It's gone. As long as you can communicate, it's gone. It's not there in a conversation. They don't look at you as this, that, or the other. They're looking at you as my doctor. And their faith just develops from you just being, other physicians, they can tell you the same thing. They relate. I mean, the public in general is very smart. They have antennas. They can easily spot somebody who's putting on a show versus somebody who's really interested in them. And I think at least I came from that background. I hope, yeah. Yep.
You were talking about how during your residency that like not the professors but the faculty was kind of in your way to move on to different rotations. Because when I was reading your biography, I thought it was going to be the patients that actually give you more of a hard time than the like the faculty and professors. So how, and you also mentioned that you weren't starving. So how did you really combat that, saying like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going to go back to my home country.
About
to-
dealing with it?
Just dealing with it.
I think just title I have is determination. I wasn't about to let anybody think I was less smart. And I internally, I knew I wasn't. I mean, you have to tell yourself you're as good or better than the other person. And my attitude was, I'm going to show you. Right? I mean, that's why I think it's the combination of believing in yourself and hard work. Everybody works hard. I'm not saying nobody's, but I think believing in yourself and saying, yeah, I'm same as better than you are. I'm going to show you. That was my attitude. Might not have worked, but it did. Yeah.
Did you find any support from fellow immigrants as you made your journey? Did you notice? I ask because I have a relative who has moved from the Philippines, and she felt much more comfortable in New York City, where there are many immigrants, versus a small town in Texas. And I wonder if you noticed that you gained support from other immigrants.
I did, socially. We did. Socially, absolutely. We had no family. We didn't know anybody. So that became our family. And actually, one of my 45-year-old friends is sitting up front. When we came here, they're like our family. 5 or 6 of our families have stayed with each other for 1978. So you learn to, and they're like-minded people. Professionally, there weren't that many people I saw there. The people moved. It's hard to maintain those ties from a medical friendship standpoint. Some of these people here in our families happen to be physicians, but I think the social circle, you just got to find people that think and act like you. Yeah, great help. We've gone through births, deaths. Yeah.
Hello. I really enjoyed your presentation. One of the things that gets lost in this type of presentation is the amount of work that you had to do to get through that pyramid system, and then the amount of work in practice as well. You know, a light week for a physician and a vascular surgeon is a 60-hour week or more. And that's penetrated with a great deal of stress and things like that. And so I hope that doesn't get lost on the audience. I think the amount of work that you had to do and continued to do in your practice is enormous.
I think, you know, people say we work hard. I mean, look at the PhDs, look at these other people. I know my daughter's one. I mean, they work really hard. I think the stress is different. It's the consequences, if you're not up to speed and doing well, is very different. My specialty is kill somebody, stroke, heart attack, all these things, my blood vessels. I mean, that's what happens. So the consequence different, but as a time factor, I mean, I didn't see much of my daughter when she was born for 2.5 years. We didn't have any family. She was pretty much doing everything. I was on call every other night. So you stayed on call, went in the morning, stayed on call the night. The next day you came home in the afternoon, like 4 o'clock, and you did nothing but eat and go to sleep and get up again to do the same thing. So I didn't see her for 2-3 years. But, you know, eventually it worked out. I mean, you have to. Immigrants know this. When you come here, you pretty much know you have to put up that game. You gotta, yeah, and most do. I mean, I kind of resented when people come and handed a whatever, freebie stuff. I mean, I'm old fashioned. You gotta make people work for it. If you really can't work, that's different. That's my attitude. If you can't, that's what the safety net's for. In those countries, we don't have safety nets. So it's a big deal if you need it. But I think most of us come with that attitude. Yeah.
I have a question. In
Yeah.
your statement that you sent me, you told one of the things mentioned excuse me, is about burnout. Could you talk about burnout and physician burnout?
Yeah, I mean, the burnout factor has gone up. It's true in a lot of other professions too, but physicians, it's gone up. It's 50% now, right on the mark. Part of it's the changes. It wasn't that bad. Before, the burnout was just the work. It's the stress and work. Now it's totally changed. I mean, the work hours in general are less. 60 hours is, I mean, when I was working, it was a lot more. Actually, that was unforgivable to have anybody work that hard. I just think, look back and I see people, kids now taking time off. Yes, it was unhealthy. It was just terrible what we did to people. But I think it's, the burnout has increased because of loss of autonomy, dictates, regulations, lawsuits. I mean, you look at 5 or 6 of these things, people say, what am I doing in this profession? Sometimes you forget why you came to this, but then you look at all these other things and you say, what am I doing here? And that's the burnout. I think that's what's doing it. It's just loss of control and not being responsible for your schedules, for when you're going to do what. In our day, I mean, when I got established, I was taking 7-8 weeks off a year to make up for what I'd missed. I made it to most games and sports and events later. But before then, it was a total blackout. I don't remember much.
Are there any more questions? like being in class with my students. Seeing none, therefore, I think we are done for today. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.